Okay, so today we're going to take a look at the bit of a closer look at the relationship between the user interface and the business layer, and some places in the both in the user interface and business layer you can go to find various helpful options and settings. So we'll start by having a look at this account object. So one thing to note with the business layer is that the user interface and the business layer are obviously very closely connected, but even down to things like the captions on the forms should relate back pretty much verbatim back to the business layer object names. Okay, so if you're looking, obviously here we're looking at the accounts form. We have a look at the general page. We can tell anything that's basically sits as an editable field on the account will be a field that you can set or get from the business layer object, from the FinAccount business layer object. So a really good way to think about it is that anything that you can actually affect any of these editable fields, you can go straight to the so we should be able to see, for instance, account.name, account.description, account.external ID, account.product-type ID. Those sorts of things will flow through straight from the user interface through to the business layer. So it's really handy when you're starting to code something to really have an understanding of the business layer and exactly where in the business layer you can go to find things. And obviously the business layer is a reasonably daunting prospect if you're just faced with a screen full of code. But actually, sometimes if you can work out what it is you need to do via the user interface, you can actually tie that back through to the correct business layer objects fairly simply. So as I said here, we're looking at an account.name, account.description. If we go into a script here, one I made earlier, which just loads an account. On that account, we should see .name, .description, etc., etc. Now, 9 times out of 10, this naming convention will be really easy to follow. There will be the odd occasion where things don't match exactly, but for the most part, it's a pretty good place to go, the user interface, to work out exactly what's available on that account object, and what also obviously for working out what fields are mandatory. You know, if you're going to be creating an account from scratch via the business layer, then by far the best thing you can do is to go through the new account wizard and see which fields the user interface is going to make you enter before it lets you create that account, because those same fields will also be mandatory on the account objects that you're creating in the business layer. So again, really important to follow things through from the UI through to the business layer, and it'll help you code and help you find things a lot quicker. So anything that basically appears as an editable field is going to appear as a field that you can set or get on the object. Anything that displays a grid is going to be a collection on the objects on the object. So for instance, we've got clients, or you look at transactions. These have all got grids, so you can bet your life that account.transactions will also be a collection of transactions, or a collection of clients, collection of files, and so forth. So again, if we go back and look at our script, you can see here .clients, and that's a collection of clients linked to the account. .transactions, a collection of transactions linked to that account. So again, the user interface just giving us some clues there as to how that a FinAccount object hangs together behind the scenes. So anything with a grid is a collection. Anything with an editable field is just a straight field that you can get offset. Any of these actions, anything that displays a pop-up form, means that there will be an associated object with that pop-up form. So for instance, an account payment opens up the account payment form. So there's not going to be a field for account.payment. There's going to be an object of FinAccount payment. Okay, and the same rings true for a close. If you want to close an account, you don't do account.close. You create a FinAccount close object, load the account, and complete all of the fields on the FinAccount close object. So again, just a really basic stuff. but really handy to help you understand a little bit of your way around the business layer. So we can see if we go back to our script and I was to declare that, you can see here there's a fin account close object. So anything that pops open a form, there's going to be an associated object with it. So even though we're looking at an account, the account, and then we want to make a refund, the object we want to look at is not the fin account, it will be the fin account refund object. So again, even the naming of the form should flow straight through to the business layer and help you identify which object it is you need to find. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Another really useful feature of the user interface, and one that's often overlooked, is if we do pop open the account payment form again, if you right click on the form tab at the top here, there's a menu option here called special, and underneath special there's a form details page. This form details page gives you the form key as well as any associated actions that you can perform on that form. So helpful for when you're creating things like shortcuts, application shortcuts, so via script code or via the user interface, as we're doing here. So you can show a form, you can send an action to a form. So you can see here, these are the actions that we're able to send to the form account payment. The other thing to note here is that the form key will give you a pretty good clue as to what the business layer object you need to use to affect an account payment will be. So basically you should pretty well be able to prefix your form key with a fin account payment, fin account. Okay, so you should be able to, I mean, it's not going to be 100% accurate, but 9 times out of 10 it's going to give you a really good starting point as to which business layer object you need to use to create an account payment or a refund or a withdrawal or a refinance or whatever. Those should ring fairly well true right the way through the business layer. So that form details is really, really useful, if nothing else, for the form key to give you an idea of what business layer objects you might need to have a look at. But also, like I say, when it comes to creating account application shortcuts, you've got the form key there. It's going to ask you for a form key when you create your shortcut, and it's going to ask you if you want to go to a specific page on that form, and then it's going to ask you if you want to execute any associated actions with that form. So all of that information is available to you under form details. You don't have to guess or go searching through old scripts to try and find where that's set. Okay, so like I say, just some really useful general user interface stuff that flows through quite nicely to the business layer. So hopefully that stuff should be reasonably straightforward. There's obviously going to be there are going to be fields and properties and objects that are going to be slightly different, but it should give you a pretty good understanding. So first step should always be the user interface, and any new staff we get here that's going to be looking at bits of scripting and the business layer, we'll go through some user interface training as well, so they have a really clear understanding of how the user interface holds together, because the business layer is pretty closely going to mirror that. Okay, so that's a little bit about the user interface and the business layer. We're going to have a look at a couple of extra little helper things that we found along the way. We have a look at the script search. So we quite often we'll quite often be racking our brains trying to find a piece of code or a script that where we've done something before. We don't always remember everything. So the script search is really, really useful. So obviously the script search is going to tell you obviously which scripts are available in this database, target object type, so you can see all of your general scripts and your object event scripts and summary pages and etc, etc. But we can also add columns. So this grid's like most others in finPOWER Connect. You can actually go and choose and add columns to it. We can actually add the script code as a column to our script search. And then within there, we can actually use a contains to actually search for specific code within this database. So if I know, for instance, that I've done a piece of code for somebody at some point, and I need to have a look and find out exactly how I did that. All I need to know is maybe the object I've used, and there you go. Those are all the scripts that contain a fin account object, maybe summary table, and there we go. And that narrows down the search for us. Obviously, you can perform the same thing through SQL, but this is really, really nice and simple. So it's just a case of adding that code column, swapping your filter there to contains, and you can search through all of your available scripts for specific bits of code. So really, really handy. We use that all the time. Okay, so this is a little bit of a hodgepodge of topics today. But again, just following on from a couple of recent sessions where we've looked at sort of useful functions in the business layer, useful things for finding your way around, and this just really ties all that stuff up. So talking of places we can go to help understand the business layer, obviously the primary one has to be the business layer help. So we can access the business layer help at any time. You can go open any script and click on the business layer help icon. Okay, that's going to eventually open up the business layer help table of contents. So obviously the business layer is huge. Table of contents gets pretty daunting to look at. We do have a search facility, so if you know exactly what you're looking for, then the search. But obviously the search brings back an awful lot of results as well. So it's can be a fairly daunting prospect looking at the business layer help for the first time. So what we've done is, say recently, it would be a few years back now, we've made the business layer help context sensitive. So if we pop this script into edit mode, if for instance I wanted to know what this ISKey value list object was all about and what options I had to use with that ISKey value list object, I can right click that object and go to business layer help. I can also use the Alt and F1 shortcut key, and that will take you straight to that page in the help. Okay, so again, much easier to find your way around the business layer help. It's now completely context sensitive. Every one of our objects is obviously in there, and every one of them is context sensitive. So if you want to have a look at the account, for instance, we can right click on our account and go to business layer help, and it will take us straight to the fin account object. So I'm sure most of you are aware of that already, but for those that aren't, really handy. Obviously the business layer help prior to that was a separate CHM file that we provided in the installation path, whereas now this is completely integrated within finPOWER Connect, so there is no concept of a separate help file. It's all built into the system, and because of that, we're able to plumb in the shortcuts from the script straight through to the help. So there you go. Those are pretty useful to look at too. Okay, last thing we'll take a look at today is some debug. So historically, we've only ever had Debug Print, and Debug Print was limited to printing strings. So we could only ever debug strings, so we'd have to go and convert all of our integers and decimals and booleans and things to strings before we could actually debug them. So now what we've done is we have here, so if you can see as I hover over Debug Print, it says Debug Print, message as a string +1 overload. So if I hit the open brackets there, you can see that's one of two, so we can still pass in a string, but we can also now pass in an object. So you can now pass a date to it, you can pass an integer to it, a decimal to it, without needing to cast that to a string. So really handy. So just to print a property off of our account, so through here we've got a test account ID, which I've set up as a constant, so we don't like hard coding our scripts. We've loaded the account, and now we're just going to print the account ID, which is just a string field. So if I run that script, there you go, script is executed successfully. A couple of different options. Sorry, just as I noticed as I did that, we now have the ability to test the script by the button down here. So you don't have to go back to the test button to test your script. You can run it from the button down here, or you can use the F5 key. The F5 key will run your script. Okay, so just a note, you've probably all heard me say before, this test button here, it says test the script. It's not a test. It's going to run whatever code you've got in here. So if you've got some code that says to go and update every account in the database and get rid of its external ID or whatever, and you go to test it, well, it's not going to test anything. It's actually going to go ahead and execute your code. So just something to be aware of. But yeah, there's now an F5 hotkey for running your scripts. So sorry, we run our script, and you can see here that's debugged our message out to our little debug page here. We also have the debug window. You can see here it just debugs that nicely out to our debug window. Okay, so that's just printing a string. A couple of other options we have now for debug. We can debug print format. So now we can debug multiple properties from the account in a nice readable format without needing to use ampersands and open quotes and close quotes everywhere, and it looks an absolute mess. Whereas now we can use a standard string format to print multiple properties from our account. So you can see here we're going to print the account ID, and that is going to be item 0. So that's the first one in our list. Then we're going to print the name, and then we're going to print the date opened. Okay, so we can print that now. There we go. That's printed that out. Account ID, that, name, and the date opened. So again, quite often you're debug printing more than one thing. So the debug format's really handy for that and saves some pretty awful looking debug strings. So again, pretty basic stuff. This may be stuff that you're all already aware of. Apologise for covering things that that you already know. But again, this is pretty useful for people who haven't spent much time with the business layer. As I said before, the debug print now has an overload which allows us to print an object. So that's not just limited to things like decimals and dates and integers. We can actually print full business layer objects too. So we've obviously loaded an account here, and we can actually pass our full account object into the debug print. And what will happen is when we run that up, it'll give us a complete dump of that fully loaded account. And here we go. This one obviously takes a little bit longer to run through. Not usually this long. Just everything seems to be particularly slow today. Okay, so here we have our loaded account. We have loaded account ID L10000. It's an account type CC Queensland. We have a BDM user, we have a branch, we have a balance overdue, overdue contractual, etc., etc. What it doesn't do is it won't give you a breakdown of all of the clients, for instance. So any collections that hang off of this, the account, won't be printed. But in terms of the actual fields that are set directly on the account, you'll be able to see all of those. So really handy when you're working through a script now. You can actually get a debug of everything. So you can see your account object as you're going through and loading it and making changes to it. You can go through and actually check that you're getting the results that you're expecting without needing to run through the whole script every time. So yep, debug print, you can pass on a full object, and really handy. As I say, the one gotcha there is that it doesn't print collections. We also now though have a finPOWER.debug watch. So this is what the debug watch allows us to do. It allows us to actually interact with that account, or allows us to view that account and all of its associated collections at runtime. So we just pass our account object to our debug watch. So again, that accepts an object. So we've loaded an account, we'll pass it in, and we run that now. That actually opens up a new screen called our debug watch screen. Okay, you can see here, it's actually got the full business layout built into the debug watch screen. So you can actually see in real time which properties and things are set and what they do. So we get pretty much the same view as we did in the debug. We get all of our standard properties, but you can now see that we've got these little plus symbols. So all of our all of the collections that we didn't have available to us when we just dumped it out into the debug print, we now have available as a drill down. So we can see our clients one. You can see there's just one client on here. If we drill down on our client, we now get the full details for that client as well. Okay, so that client is that client there. It's Amelia sample, etc., etc., etc. And then obviously any other clients would obviously then be in the list as well. So really useful. Debug Watch is again, it's really handy. You can see what you're doing in real time. Plus you get the business layer help down here as well as a bit of, to give you a bit of extra help. Things to watch out for with Debug Watch are that you cannot use it in an object event script. Obviously an object event script is going to fire in the background, and therefore there's no way to pull that user interface box through from the object event. So you're limited to using these in sort of general scripts and action scripts and things like that. So nothing that has as an object event. If you're going to use an object event and you want a dump of all the properties, then use your debug print and pass your object in there. So Debug Watch is great, but like I say, it is limited and you can't use it in object event scripts. One last thing or two last things with debug. Firstly, please remember to remove lines of debug from your scripts once you're finished with them. Okay, so there should never be an instance of a script in a production environment that has debug in it. Okay, as you've already seen when we ran this through, this script now takes an awful lot longer to run than it should do because it's having to go through and debug all of this stuff to the debug window and the debug screen. Okay, so you can imagine as your script behind the scenes, this is something that will run in a millisecond with that line of code removed. That's now taking 20 seconds or more to execute. Okay, so really important. There's absolutely no need for a script to exist in production with debug in there. It's just going to slow it down, and depending on what you're debugging and how much is in there, it can actually slow it down quite dramatically. So you're actually going to end up causing some serious performance problems with your script. Just by failing to remove your debug. So just a note there to please make sure that you do get rid of your debug once you're done. The last thing I wanted to cover when it comes to debug and debug options is the use of message box. Okay, message box is a standard VB function that we do not use anywhere in any scripts under any circumstances. Okay, the use of a message box, if you were to throw one of those up in the middle of a script, and it was, in this instance here, we've loaded an account, so that account is now loaded in memory. Nobody else can make any changes to it. So if your script fires open a message box, the user's gone to lunch, or the user sees it, decides they can't be bothered, go make a cup of tea, it's going to lock that account for everybody in the database until they get back and click it. Okay, so you're going to start causing deadlocks through your code. There is no need to use a message box at all in finPOWER Connect. There should be no reason at all to need to use one. Okay, we've already seen in previous sessions that in order to display an error to a user, you simply have to set main as false. That will fail. That will throw an error which you can change, and you can return that to the user. So message box, you don't need it. You've got all of these debug options available to you. There's no need to use message box. Okay, so the only time that a message box is if you absolutely cannot survive without one, then use a general user interface script, and that user interface is passed through as an object to our main function. Okay, and that allows us to do interact with the user interface. But a general user interface script is the only time that has its own message box function. Okay, so you still can't call a standard message box. You must use the user interface.messageBox, and behind the scenes, our own implementation of that message box. It looks exactly the same as a normal message box, but behind the scenes, there's code in there to make sure that any database that it doesn't interrupt or keep open any database transactions. So all of those database locks and things cannot happen if you're using a user interface.message box. The only other instance is where you're using a page set. The page set handler also has a message box object. So I think the page set handler passes through PSH as page set handler through to the initialize function, and you can use PSH.messageBox. Okay, those are the only options when it comes to using a message box. Otherwise, stick with your debug options, okay, and you'll be absolutely fine. But like I say, please, please, please don't use message box. We've seen it time and time and time again where people have done it thinking it won't cause any problem, and it's caused issues. Okay, so we don't use it anywhere in our code, and we'd hope that you also don't do the same. Okay, one final note. I suppose there's an option for actually debugging things. As we've looked at in a previous session, our finPOWER.runtime library actually has a file utilities function where we can do things like append to an existing text file, or we can actually write to a text file. So I guess if you really wanted to, you could dump out debug to write that out to a file, or you could create yourself a user log and view it in Task Manager. There's another option as well. Okay, so those are our debug options. A couple of other little handy hints and tips in there. Hopefully you've all got something from that, and we'll call that a day.